Joining us now is Keith Lockhart, the conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra. Keith, thanks so much for speaking with me this afternoon.
My pleasure, Sam. Good to talk to you.
So the Boston Pops have several events coming up over the next couple of months. One of them is you have a series of Leonard Bernstein's centennial tribute shows. When you're putting together an event like that, how do you pick material from his catalog to perform?
Well, that's the tough part of the assignment, because we have somebody who was such an amazing communicator musically in so many different directions. The Leonard Bernstein tribute is, certainly we're joining all of the musical world as everybody celebrates the centennial of probably the most important American musician of the 20th century. But since he's from Lawrence, Mass, and went to Boston Latin and to Harvard, he's kind of ours, and we'd like to take credit for him. So our spring season at the Boston Pops, our traditional season, that's I think our 138th season or something like that, starts on May 9th and runs through the middle of June. And during that time, we're presenting 5 Leonard Bernstein tribute concerts, as well as a semi-staged On the Town, his great 1944 musical, and a West Side Story in concert for 3 performances. So there's plenty of Leonard Bernstein stretched across the whole season.
When you're putting together that event, how does the rehearsal process work with the orchestra?
The same way that it does in any one of our spring seasons. We perform 5 to 7 concerts a week, and we have 2 or 3 rehearsals associated with those concerts, and we will start rehearsing at the beginning of May, right around the time that we're performing. But the hard work happens before that, just putting the programs together and figuring out what we'd like to present to our audiences.
So everyone gets the music ahead of time, and then you get the entire orchestra together a few times to rehearse?
One of the things that makes an orchestra, a professional orchestra, a great professional orchestra like the Boston Symphony and the Boston Pops, is that you expect everybody to be able to show up at Symphony Hall, being able to play their part, and then it's just a matter of assembly. And so it's not quite like your school band, where you have a month of rehearsal. We get together and we put the thing together, and then we play it for the audience.
Another event you have coming up is a John Williams film night at the end of May. Can you tell me about your experiences working with John and putting together these events? He's going to be in town to conduct.
Yes, and John is the laureate conductor of the ensemble. He was my predecessor in position as conductor of the Boston Pops from 1980 to 1993. And John comes back every season to grace us with his presence and do a couple of shows. And this year, those shows, I believe, are on the 23rd and 24th of May. They are part of the Pops spring season, and John brings not only some of his incredible music, including some of the music, I believe, from the most recent Star Wars film, but he also tends to pay tribute broadly to the glories of the Hollywood score.
What advice has he given you, especially when you took over for his position in the 90s, about conducting?
Well, he keeps his counsel to himself most of the time. He's always available for advice. I've often called him on musical matters, but very first time I met him was the night before the press conference that appointed me in 1995, and he had only one piece of advice. He said, as a 35-year-old, you will be tempted to try really hard to make this organization your own, and you have to remember that it's gone on for 100 years without either of us, and will go on after we're gone. So bite your tongue, resist the temptation to run in and try to change everything all at once, and be a good steward of the tradition, and eventually it will reflect your attitudes toward music and what you want it to be. And I tried very hard. It was very hard at the beginning, because when you're 35, you want to make sure that you've differentiated the group from the group it was when it was Arthur Fiedler's and John Williams. But I think especially as I've been there over 2 decades now, it makes more and more sense.
What is the process in planning the events for the spring season? Is that a collaborative effort, or is that something that you mainly lead and what you want to put on?
It's something that I lead, but it's in collaboration with our marketing department, the people who tell us what they think they can sell and how much of each individual thing, Broadway, jazz, rock and roll, classical, how much they think we can sell in the course of the season. And I have a team of people at the Pops who come with ideas and help evaluate ideas that I have. And so it's collaborative, but at the end of the day, one way or another, it's my fault.
You've worked with several pop musicians and really musicians from all different genres of music. Is there anybody that comes to mind in particular that you haven't worked with that you'd like to work with in the future?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's always people we say, gee, wouldn't it be great if that person would do a concert with orchestra? A lot of singers and bands and songwriters are nervous about it because it's something outside of their comfort zone. Over the years, I mean, just recently, I mean, we've worked with, Kelly Clarkson and Train and Steve Tyler from Aerosmith, and we work with people, both people who are kind of classics, and people who are, popular at the moment. Andy Grammer is opening the season with us. But on the to-do list, I think Bruno Mars would do a great orchestra show, and one that would really appeal across our demographic. I've always, just as a classic, I've always wanted to have Springsteen with us before I retire to do the 4th of July, because that would be kind of big. So if either of those two are listening to Emerson College Radio, then, guys, don't be a stranger, call me.
When you're working with somebody like a Steven Tyler or a Pete Townsend, like you worked with last summer, how involved are you with arranging material that originally may have been performed by just a 4-piece rock band?
I don't tend to do. I mean, I have the orchestrational arrangement abilities, but generally speaking, we have a stable of great arrangers, some of the world's best, who write for Broadway and write for the Nashville studios and write for the movies. And between all of those people, we farm those arrangements out to the people we think will do the best job. And I kind of keep a supervisory role over those things, but I don't actually put pen to paper.
Do they generally want to listen to the arrangements before the show? Like you mentioned, they might be a little bit apprehensive about performing with a big orchestra.
Well, that's one of the things, there's very rarely time to do that, because usually when they show up to rehearse, that's pretty much, the time we have to put the thing together, and they don't have time to sit back and listen to them. And so that is one of the things that causes that apprehension, I think. But, we hope that with the Boston Pops in particular, people will trust us and know that we know how to do this, and that we have arrangers who will make the thing, seem very familiar to them, even if they do have 80 more people on stage than they normally do.
What was your main instrument growing up?
Well, my main instrument through my undergraduate degree was piano. I started when I was 7, and I did a bachelor's degree in piano performance. My orchestral background was as a clarinet player. That's where I got my chops, playing in ensembles for other conductors. And I've dabbled in lots of things. I play a little sax, a little flute. I've studied some string instruments, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I played them.
Do you think it's essential to be familiar with all of the instruments in the orchestra so when you're instructing people, you can have an easier time relating to them?
It is definitely essential that you have the knowledge to know why things on a certain instrument are difficult that are not different. To know, for instance, that there's an F sharp that is high up on the piccolo that is always flat, so that when you hear it that way, you don't look at the piccolo player and say, "Why is that?" And you go, well, hey, I know that note's always flat. Can you bring it up a little bit? There's a difference between being able to actually play the instrument yourself and knowing a lot about how the instrument is played. The same way as in coaching. Bill Belichick is a brilliant coach. Nobody thinks he can throw a 60-yard pass or run a 4.5 40. But he knows how to get people to do those things better, and he knows what is difficult and what in each player's physicality and in the role that they have. And I think that's kind of analogous to what conductors do.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a conductor?
Nope. I didn't even think about it till I intended to be a lawyer. When I did my undergrad, I was going to take the LSATs and go to law school. And then one of my piano professor actually said, you seem to have this coaching, the student of the game kind of mentality. And did you ever think about conducting? And I dabbled in it and realized that it was where my voice was best expressed. So I kind of headed in that direction.
With the Boston Pops, are there a lot of moving parts as far as different players in the orchestra, or is it generally the same people year to year?
There's always rotation in any orchestra. I'd say, maybe 10 people over the course of a year. We are the same orchestra basically as the Boston Symphony. It's pretty much the same group of players in two different brands. And I'd say probably there's roughly 100 people full-time in the orchestra, then a host of people who come in on a substitute basis. And I'd say of those 100 people in the orchestra, about 10 on average go in the course of a year. And it's a highly competitive audition process to replace them. It is. I mean, it's a very important part of the audition process. Actually, is being able to not only identify talent, but to kind of project how that particular person will fit into the ensemble. There are extraordinarily good instrumentalists who would make really, really lousy ensemble players, and there are clues in the way that they perform that would make you think that just, they don't play well with others, basically, to use the kindergarten reference. And one of the biggest responsibilities of the music director of an organization is to work with the players to determine who the best players to expand the orchestra are.
Over the years, is that something that you've developed? Like you mentioned Bill Belichick, maybe over the years he would learn how to scout better players. Like
I think without doubt, I think it's very similar to that. And all these things, the more experience you have, the more people you've heard both successfully and unsuccessfully try to fulfill a position, give you a better idea of what it is you're looking for. And as in many of these things, when you're a rookie NFL coach or a first-time music director, you're thrown into the position of having to make those decisions with very little experience bank to base them on, and hopefully you make the right ones most of the time. And but I'm sure if I look back at the decisions I made 20 years ago, I'd probably look at like anybody would. I'd look at a few of them and go, well, that was a mistake. So,
what do you listen to generally? Are you more a classical music person, or do you listen to lots of different things?
I don't really listen a lot for recreation, and It's funny, people are always surprised by that, and then somebody looked at me once and said, oh yeah, and I'll bet like PGA players don't play golf on the weekends. I said, exactly right. I mean, you have to clear your brain. Most people listen to music for entertainment or for distraction, and for me, frankly, after I listen to it all day, working on things, evaluating things, learning things, or I listen to it in my head, even if I'm not actually playing a stereo, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to hear any more music. You need to allow it to clean out. When I was a kid, though, I didn't grow up in a particularly a classical music household. My dad liked that sort of thing and played a lot of it, so I had a lot of it in my background. But, I listened to, the Stones and Led Zeppelin and Queen and the bands that were big when I was a kid. So as a result, I think I ended up with kind of an eclectic approach to music that probably helps the Boston Pops job.
Do you remember a time when that may have shifted, that you just started to say, this really is my job and it's going to be difficult for me to listen like I used to be able to?
Well, I think it's like most people, when you get into grad school and you realize that you're not messing around anymore, and things have real implications, and you better get your life together and figure out what's going to happen because your parents just stopped supporting you. That sort of thing. I think that's probably around the time that I got more focused in my pursuit. But it also, I didn't really, as I said, decide to be a conductor till I was about 20. I was working on 21. And at that time, I had to make a lot of decisions about how I was going to focus, because it's not a job you can kind of, pad your way into.
Talking to Keith Lockhart of the Boston Pops Orchestra, one more question for you. If there's anybody listening who is interested in performing in an orchestra someday, what is the best advice that you can give them?
Well, the first thing you need these days is absolute mastery of your instrument. That may seem kind of obvious, but for a job at the in the violin section of the Boston Symphony, the Boston Pops, we probably have 250 applicants for a single job, and that's representative of another probably 1,000 violin performance majors who didn't make it as far as being able to apply for that job. On top of that, these days, I think everybody who goes into musical performance really has to have a very a wide set of skills and very open eyes about their possibilities, because this is not a growing profession. There are fewer and fewer full-time jobs for people to play just in an orchestra, and so people who have a wide skill set, who can run their music business like a business, who understand how to play things other than strictly classical music, those are the people who are going to have satisfying careers 25 years down the road.
All right, Keith, thanks so much for taking the time, and good luck with the upcoming performances in the spring season.
Thank you. We really appreciate it, and come check us out.